Okay, obviously, President Jefferson wanted to see some benefits from the Lewis and Clark expedition. And I will just preface that by saying it was on September 23rd of 1806, September 23rd of 1806, that the Lewis and Clark expedition reached St. Louis, back from their journey. September 23rd, 1806. The Lewis and Clark expedition reached St. Louis. And they brought back lots of things, but I'm going to give you a list of 8 things that they brought back from their long journey that they thought were of interest. Okay, and I might even start with you guys and let you kind of guess maybe some of the things they might have brought back. See how smart you are. So, Caitlin, my dear, if you were on the Lewis and Clark expedition, what might you bring back to show Thomas Jefferson after that long journey? What might you bring back? Very good. Samples of plants. Now actually Lewis in his journals had charted over 178 different plants that they did during the expedition. And then they didn't bring all 178 back, but they brought samples of plants back. But he charted actually over 178 different plants on the expedition. So samples of plants. Now Caitlin kind of said the other parts, but we'll be more specific. Tristan, what do you think? What would you have brought back? You can piggyback off her if you want. What would you have brought back?
Animal hides.
Okay, furs of various animals. Very good. Furs of various animals. Now, Lewis also charted the number of different species that they ran into during the trip, and he charted in his journals over 122 different species of animals that they encountered on the Lewis and Clark expedition. Okay, charted over 122 different species. Hey, Emily, my dear, what else might you bring back? Remember, nobody's been there before. You know, that a lot of kids say that, and they actually did not, but it's a good guess. But a lot of kids say water samples. That was probably something they weren't going to, bring back. But, well, I'll give you another shot. What do you think? What other type of samples? If not water, maybe what?
Dirt.
Yeah, soil samples. There you go. Soil samples. They brought several different soil samples. Lots of different types of soil on a journey like that. So they brought back soil samples. Okay? Yes, Malcolm.
Like a map?
Maps, absolutely. That was probably the most important thing. Very good. Maps. Who was the map maker? Who was the famous map maker? But who was chosen because he made great maps? Clark, yeah. He was a master map maker, so to speak. So maps, that was probably the most important thing because we need to get back. Now I've already kind of mentioned one in hinting because Lewis charted in these. What was the other thing he brought back? Journals, yeah, journals. So maps and journals and samples of plants, furs of various animals, soil samples. What else might you bring back, Grady? Because you want Jefferson and these people to see what you saw. Well, that'd be more the journals, but that's a good guess. Hunter? We're going to bring furs of animals, soil samples, samples of plants. What else might you bring a sample of? Kayla, what do you think? What else might, if you go out in nature, might you encounter you've never seen before?
Rocks.
What?
Rocks.
That's right. Samples of various rocks and stones. Samples of various stones. You ever been by the front door of my house? Front of my house? Every time I go somewhere, I grab a rock from somewhere, bring it back, and put it in my little rock garden by my maple trees. I kind of like samples of rocks, different rocks. Okay, what else? Kezia, what would you bring back? A couple more things. So you brought samples of animals, their furs. What else might you bring from an animal? Say it. Bones. Very good. Bones of various animals. Bones of various animals. Or we're forgetting the thing that really bothered them when they went around the Great Falls. Samples of what? What? No. What? No, what bothered them worse? What? Insects. Yeah, insects. Very good. So, some of the things that were brought back, very important from the Lewis and Clark expedition, were maps, journals, samples of plants, and I mentioned the Lewis had charted over 178 different plants on the expedition, samples of insects, bones of various animals, furs of various animals. And I also said that Lewis had charted over 122 different species of animals they ran into. Some soil samples, and like Ivan said, they brought back samples of different rocks. Okay? Now, after the expedition was over, Clark actually freed his Negro slave York, freed him. However, it took York 10 years to really officially gain his freedom. He was free from Clark, but he was not free from slavery. Okay? So Clark freed his slave York, but during this time he found his way back into slavery off and on, and never officially became free until 10 years later. So let's sum up. Two little summaries of the Lewis and Clark expedition. First of all, they had traveled over 8,000 total miles. 8,000, over 8,000 total miles. It took them 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days. They traveled over 8,000 total miles over a period of 2 years, 4 months, and 10 days. Quite a journey. Quite a journey. And what did it do? It gave President Thomas Jefferson the important information the United States needed about that vast territory of Louisiana. What's out there? Can we expand? We'll be talking about that, obviously, after we get through some more information. So our next subtopic then is going to be Lewis and Clark after the core discovery. What happened to Lewis and what happened to Clark after this historic journey in the Louisiana territory? What happened to them? And they really took wildly divergent paths, two separate paths. And we'll talk about Lewis first, okay? Talk about Lewis first. Now remember, Lewis was the guy that was appointed by who? Jefferson, okay? So he was kind of the main guy, okay? Well, when he got back, he received 1,600 acres of land and a bonus of $1,228 from the federal government for his efforts, okay? He received 1,600 acres of land and $1,228 as a bonus for his efforts. So he got paid during the expedition, but then they gave him a $1,228 bonus when he got back. And President Jefferson appointed him the territorial governor of the upper Louisiana Territory. Okay, it's a big, vast area. You can go on a map, right? So it goes all the way through here. He was made the territorial governor of the upper part of the Louisiana Territory. Now, if you're going to be a territorial governor, you've got to be a good administrator, you've got to be organized, you've got to have your stuff together. Unfortunately, Lewis was a very ineffective administrator. Not very good at what he did. Didn't do a very good job as territorial governor. And he got into what? What did they get into? You kids, people get depressed, they get into drugs now, but what did they get into there? Oh, alcohol. Yeah, he drank incredibly heavily. Fell into deep depressions. He had a heck of a time when he got back. Was not successful as territorial governor of the upper Louisiana Territory. He started to drink heavily, fell into deep depression, and he actually became suicidal, and he tried several times to kill himself. Very well documented. He tried several times to kill himself. So he became very suicidal and made several attempts on his own life. And I guess I'll just give you a quick counseling philosophy on that. If you're making several attempts on your life and you're failing, you're asking for help. Because if you were serious about it, right, it wouldn't take much. So he had some issues, okay? Well, finally, on October 11th, 1809, while he was on his way to Washington, D.C., Lewis died at a shabby cabin in Tennessee. So on October 11th, 1809, Lewis was on his way to Washington, D.C., when he died at a shabby cabin in Tennessee. Now, we got some mixed reports on his death. A lot of accounts say that he committed suicide, but the thing was that he suffered 2 gunshot wounds. This is a fact. Okay, he suffered 2 gunshot wounds. Now that makes it a little bit difficult when you think about committing suicide and getting shot twice. I don't know if a person could do that or not. But there are mixed reports on his death. It's really not clear to this day whether he was murdered or whether he committed suicide. But he was found with 2 gunshot wounds in that shabby cabin in Tennessee. William Clark, on the other hand, had a much more successful life after the Corps discovery. He was appointed by President Jefferson as a brigadier general. He was given a higher rank of brigadier general when he got back from the Lewis and Clark expedition. And he was appointed superintendent of Indian Affairs for the upper Louisiana territory. So when William Clark got back, he was raised to the rank of brigadier general, and he was also assigned as superintendent of Indian Affairs for the upper Louisiana territory. Well, in 1813, President James Madison, and we'll talk about him later, made Clark governor of the Missouri Territory, which was a pretty good piece of land at the time. So in 1813, President James Madison appointed William Clark as governor of the Missouri Territory, and he ably handled that role. He was a very good territorial governor. He did a very nice job for President Madison. Well, what do you think he did also in 1813? Think about it. What did Lewis do on the trip that was important but no longer could really organize? His journals. Okay, so Lewis's journals were put together by Clark. He arranged for the publication of his and Lewis's journals. I'd even have them over here if I look real carefully. Let me see. Look at this. My God. The Journals of the Expedition, Lewis and Clark. There they are. Now these aren't, first edition, first printings, obviously, but these are the journals of Lewis and Clark. And in 1813, after Lewis's death, Clark made the decision to get those published. But they were very important that the American people had an opportunity to read those journals. Well, Clark then married, and he actually named his son Meriwether Lewis Clark, okay, in honor of his friend. So Clark married, and he named his son Meriwether Lewis Clark. Now you might see this as interesting. Sacagawea died, a very young woman, in 1812. And Clark adopted Sacagawea's son, Pompey, or Jean Baptiste, and her daughter, Lizette. So after Sacagawea died in 1812, Clark and his wife adopted Sacagawea's son, Pompey, or Jean Baptiste, and also she had a daughter at that time named Lizette, and the Clarks raised those 2 children. Whatever happened to Pompey? Anybody know? Did he have a tough life, good life? Well, he eventually, when he grew up, became a very skilled interpreter and a scout in the Western Mountains. He became a very skilled interpreter himself, like his mother, and he became a scout in the Western Mountains. And he finally died in Oregon at the age of 61. So he lived a pretty long life for people of that time period. So Pompey eventually became a skilled interpreter and scout in the Western Mountains and died in Oregon at the age of 61. What about William Clark? How did he do? Clark died on September 1st, 1838. Died on September 1st, 1838. At the age of 77, which again was a pretty long life expectancy for someone in that era. So he led a very good life, unlike his friend Meriwether Lewis. He died on September 1st, 1838, at the age of 77. And really was a genuine American hero. Probably more of a hero to this country than Lewis was. But think about it. You guys really, did you know any distinction between the two before the class? I mean, did they just appear to you to be 2 good explorers? They were good. They did a lot for our country. Lewis, unfortunately, had a very tragic life after the expedition, whereas Clark lost. Okay, what we're gonna do now, because I appreciate you guys' efforts, is we're going to watch a video on the Lewis and Clark expedition.